Still just kind of a Zoom broadcast. Well, I believe that we're live. Tim, welcome back to the channel. As always, Chris Morrison, Gulfside Ministries. And give me just a second while I just want to try to put a Zoom playlist on this, y'all. But this is Tim Nichols. We are continue our conversation on the book of Hebrews as we do Hebrews 10:26. Is that right? Is that where we
Yep.
are, Tim? The big
10:26 and
scary
following.
passage, right?
Yes, the verse that terrifies Bible college freshmen.
I can't imagine why it would scare anyone.
Well,
So let to it. You said earlier we'll do a little bit of shucking and jiving. Do me a favor. Take a second and explain kind of where we are in this passage as people start to join us. I am going to put the link on the Facebook page so people can join us, and then I'm going to try to put a thumbnail in the next minute or two. All right. So go ahead, sir.
so where we are is this is the fourth major warning passage. For those of you who don't know, Hebrews is kind of organized around a series of warning passages. It's one of the ways we kind of talk about the book. And it's a long, mostly unbroken doctrinal development throughout the book with periodic warning asides. Therefore, guys, we should be careful about this and that. And they escalate. So the language gets a little sharper and a little more heated in each one. So we start in 2:1 in terms of warnings with we should give the more earnest heed to the things we have heard, lest we drift away. And by the time we get to 10:26, it's for if we sin willfully after we've received the knowledge of the truth, it's much sharper. And this is what makes this verse scary for people is you read that verse and you think to yourself, well, I've sinned willfully.
Haven't we all?
Right. So doesn't that mean that whatever he's about to say, like I'm in the crosshairs, right? And this is the reason that we should not read Bible verses. We should read Bible books.
Say a little more about that because I'm not going to pick on my personal pastor, but I just want to say the place where I go to church, he's a great preacher. I would call him kind of he's free guys friendly is what I would put him. And he does a lot of topical sermons. And I would just say that what he said today was true in my own sermon that I was listening to. My wife, no theologian, but she lives with me. She got a little frustrated that the passage that we were reading, she says, it really didn't feel like what he was talking about came right out of the passage. So Tim, just take just a second and talk about what the value is going through books with a big passage like this, and then also just not even scary passages. Why should we think about going through books?
Because these are not a set of unconnected, it's not a set of MASH episodes where you can just jump in anywhere and watch an episode and it all makes sense. This is a single book, and it was the way you would have encountered it.
Right.
Is not like this is not a set of sermon notes that somebody sent the Jerusalem church and it was meant to be preached in 13 sermons, a chapter a week across. Like that's not how this works. This letter was sent. It's a letter. It was read in the Jerusalem church from end to end, all at the same time, which I mean doesn't even take, it's 13 chapters. It doesn't even take that long.
Right. How long would it take you to read this book all the way through from the beginning? Because we've done like 10 hours worth of material so far. How long would it take you just to read this straight through?
What, hour and 15, hour and a half, something like that. I
Right.
mean, you can do Revelation in about an hour.
Yeah.
I know because I heard someone do it from memory.
So no one
Fantastic,
gets to complain about Bible verse memorization.
fantastic thing. It was he his ministry is called, I think, Word Sower, and this is what he does. He has a whole bunch of Bible memorized. And he'll just go, the whole introduction was, imagine you're in a church in Asia Minor, and you show up to church on a particular evening and they say, hey, we have a letter from John. And then he started, and an hour later he was done.
That's
And
so cool.
if you've never experienced Revelation that way, you really should. It's fantastic. And that's how it's meant to be
Right.
experienced. And you see things when you're taking the whole thing in one shot and just listening to it and letting it in. Of course,
Right.
going back and studying it rewards study. It rewards going back and listening over and over and over again. Obviously, we've been at it for 2,000 years now.
Right.
But you see things when I mean, if we're going to go through all of Hebrews and it takes us, say, on the high side, 90 minutes, you're going to see and hear resonances that you will miss going through
Right.
reading a paragraph in your morning devotions, even if you never skip a day.
Right.
It won't be the same as taking it all in one 90-minute shot. Just
Right.
like imagine watching, I don't know, pick a movie in like 10-minute snippets.
Over
Like
the course
watching
of forever.
a
Right.
90-minute or a 2-hour movie in 8 to 10 minute snippets, even
Right.
if you don't skip a day and you do one every day, still, like, how much are you going to miss that you would have caught if you just sat down and watched the whole thing?
So this is going to be my encouragement to our audience after we finish this however long video, hour and a half long discussion on this very controversial passage. And again, this is a live episode, so any questions, comments, cries of outrage, do put them in. I guess the comments are over there, whichever side they are, and I can see them here, and we'll respond to them as we go. But when the video is over, go back and then get an audio Bible and listen to the entire book of Hebrews up to this point. And I think what you're going to find is the stuff that Tim, the way he's going to lay this out, it's not just, oh, that's a way to read it. I think you're going to see that you're going to pick up resonances from verse 1 all the way up to where we are. Is that kind of a fair way to kind of put that all together, Tim?
That's that's certainly what I'm going for.
Absolutely. So I'm
Again,
going to go.
failure is
I'm,
always an option, but
not for you, not allowed. So, well, this is the passage that we're in, Hebrews chapter 10, 26. Anything in the immediate context that you want to touch on before we start?
absolutely. One thing that's really, really important, if you're not going to read your way all the way up to 1026 and then dive into 1026, at least go back to like 10:1 or 10:11 and
Yeah.
read your way in, because you need to read the two paragraphs that immediately precede this.
Okay.
Um,
So
in
start us
order
into these two
for
paragraphs.
in order for 1026 to make sense, because
Mhm.
what we're saying is that the law cannot, and the law itself shows us that it cannot
Mhm. Oh, it's 10:1. It's
make,
a shadow, the law having a shadow. I'm back in 10:1. The law is having a shadow of the good things to come.
yes. So it can't purify you permanently. And you
Mhm.
know that because every Yom Kippur, you're doing it all over again.
Mhm.
And every morning, the ascension offering is happening. Every evening, the ascension offering is happening. Every year, even the high priest is making sacrifice for sins. The blood of bulls and goats just can't get it done, cannot take away, can cover. And that's throughout the Old Testament, the language is it covers sin. It doesn't take it away. So then
Right. Right. Right.
we roll into the Psalm 40 quote, sacrifice and offering you did not desire. Um, and what's actually happening is God's will in the end, verse 10, by that will, by God's will, we have been sanctified. We have been made holy through the offering of the body
Mhm.
of Jesus Christ once for all, the thing which the blood of bulls and goats could not do. Jesus Christ once for all did.
Right. Where's that verse? I'm looking at, oh, there it
That's
is. Right,
10.
verse 10. Yep. Once for all. Got it. Yep.
And so then now knowing that this is how the sacrifices work, contrast the priesthoods. You know what's not in the tabernacle furniture anywhere? a seat,
I think, yeah, a seat. You said that last time. A seat's not there, right? Because there's no sitting down.
because the only seat in the tabernacle furniture is the mercy seat, and Yahweh sits there.
Mhm.
The priests have to keep coming back, have to stay on duty. But Jesus sits down at the right hand of God. We're tagging back Psalm 2, Psalm 110, the messianic, come and sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool.
Right.
Um, because it's over. He made the sacrifice. It worked.
Tetelestai, it is finished.
Yes. Yeah, it turns out he meant it. Um, and so and then that justifies, and he tags the new covenant passage from Jeremiah that justifies the claim that their sins and lawless deeds I will remember no more. Like there's not another Yom Kippur sacrifice that
Mhm.
we need to make. It's done. So where there is remission of these, there's no longer an offering for sin.
That's verse
You don't
18.
do the Yom Kippur, the offering for sin thing again. You don't do that. And this is the important thing. This is good news. Jesus has done it. It's handled. You don't have to keep doing that.
Right.
And therefore we come boldly, and that's the like hold on to your confession, come boldly, encourage one another. And
Mhm.
now we roll into 1026. And this is where if you just read Bible verses and you wake up one morning and your devotional passage starts in Hebrews 10:26, and if we sin willfully after we've received knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful expectation of judgment and fiery indignation, which will devour the adversaries. Eek.
Yeah.
Like, if you're reading this in total isolation, if this is what's in your fortune cookie, um,
That
that's
if I can
terrible.
just, this sounds terrifying. I
Right.
think of all the passages in the New Testament, this is top 3 or 4 most terrifying passages.
Right, exactly. If this is what's in your fortune cookie, well, okay. So I'm just telling you what it says. If we sin willfully, there's no more sacrifice for sin, just an expectation of judgment and fiery indignation, which will devour the adversaries. Now, have you ever sinned willfully, Chris?
Yes,
Well, then
yes, I'm
there's no
confessing to you have.
sacrifice for you, just an expectation of judgment. Right?
Right.
Of course, it's terrifying. But let us not forget that this is not Hebrews 1:1. This is Hebrews 10:26.
Mhm.
And we just saw that there being no more sacrifice for sin is good news.
Yeah.
So if we sin willfully after we've received knowledge of the truth, if we abandon the faith, which is the thing he's warning them against all the way through, right? Hold
Mhm.
fast your confession was the preceding paragraph. Don't give up. Okay, if we sin willfully, what's he talking about? Well, giving up. We've received the knowledge of the truth. We give up. We go back
Mhm.
to what? The Levitical system.
Right.
Sacrifice for sins no longer exists. You can go back, but there's no magic in Yom Kippur anymore. It's still over. You can go back to it, but it's still over. It doesn't cover you. You can't opt out of Jesus and go, let's just do the BC thing.
Mhm.
We're now in AD, but let's just do the BC thing anyway. And I mean, God inspired that. It's all in the Torah. Let's just do that and get these people off our backs. It's what Abraham did. It's good enough for Moses. It's good enough for me. Let's just, you know what? My mother-in-law will be so happy. You have no idea. Like, no, there's no sacrifice for sins. It doesn't work anymore.
So, at the risk of being a bit sacrilegious, the coupon has expired.
Yes. Like that thing where you could go cover your sins every year by offering a goat.
Mhm.
Nope. Doesn't work anymore.
Right.
We're still talking about the same thing. Jesus didn't just end sacrifice for the people who opt into Christianity and opt out of Judaism. He ended sacrifice, period, for all of humanity, for all of time. He made
Right.
the final sacrifice. So if you bail on that, if you pretend like it didn't happen, God is not going to be like, well, I was really mad about it, but then Yom Kippur rolled around and you
Yeah.
offered the goat, and so I guess you're covered this year. Like,
Right.
no, no, what you have coming is verse 27.
Before you do verse 27, I just want to, and forgive me for like beating this horse to death, but this is such a controversial passage. So the sinning willfully, that could be taken. You asked me earlier, have you ever sinned willfully? I mean, that could be taken from anything from I did something I know was wrong, or in the context, we could be talking about the particular sin of apostasy. I know there are some commentators who go back to Numbers and want to distinguish between sin of ignorance and the sin of high hand. And so, how should we take, or how do you think we should take sinning willfully in this context? Is it one of these, or all of these, or what does that look like?
I mean, the thing most I would, I think, do a sort of concentric rings typological thing here. The thing in focus, the immediate exhortation, the paragraph before was hold fast your confession. That's
Mm-hmm.
what he's been talking about all along from the very first warning passage. We need to take the more earnest heed to the things we've heard, lest we drift away. It's the whole book is about that. So he hasn't changed topic. He's still talking about that. Like that's the particular willful sin that he has in his sights. That's on the little X in the middle of the bullseye. That's
Right.
what it's on.
And
Is
that's
that
what he's been building up to the entire book, the drifting away and then the not entering into the rest because of unbelief. And then the, what was it? Hebrews 6, the idea of, you fall away, I think was the
all
language
these
in
things
Hebrews
have
6.
happened for
Yeah.
you? You've tasted the good word of God and the powers of the age to come and fallen away. Yeah,
Falling away.
like
And
this is
now we're
all
at
the
the,
way through the book. It's impossible. And this is again, read books, not verses. You read the book and you hit this verse, you know what he's talking about.
right.
Now, is it true? Like, is there a resonance here when we go back to the sin of the high hand versus sinning in ignorance? Yeah, there was never high-handed sin. There was never a sacrifice that covered that.
Right.
Um, you just like there's nothing in Numbers that says when you openly rebel against God and you know exactly what you're doing, come and offer this sacrifice. It's not there. You just, you repent and you take your lumps. Um,
Bad
and
news for you, dude.
what we'll take David with Bathsheba.
Hmm.
When the prophet Nathan comes in, he doesn't say, okay, this is going to cost you like 10 bulls and 100 goats. And like, no. Would you like to flee before your enemies? Would you like a plague? Would you?
Yeah. Right.
Now, David does ultimately offer sacrifices, and the penitential Psalms talk about that, but that's a return to fellowship with God after having acknowledged his sin. There's no like, okay, you can cover this. You can decide if sleeping with your neighbor's wife is worth the 10 bulls, you're going to pay for it.
Right.
No, that's certainly in the background here. But he's not suddenly changed his mind to talk about all willful sin. Now, if we look at like what is there an application here? Sure. Yeah, there is a particular willful sin in view, but say you're not tempted to leave the Christian faith, you're just tempted to sleep with your neighbor's wife. Well, are there things we're going to see in this passage that should worry you? Yes,
Sure.
very much.
Right. But again, to the bullseye point, the particular thing in mind is apostasy. It is in historical context, the apostasy is going back to Old Testament sacrificial system. And I guess you can make a broader application to anyone who was a believer, Hebrew 6 style, the whole book so far, and then they said, nah, this Jesus thing's not for me anymore. These are the people for whom, well, look, there's nothing else. You can't, there's nothing else to go back to. There's nothing there's no sacrifices for you. You've left the altar, so to speak.
Yes, they're deconstructing their faith and
Mm-hmm.
joining
Okay.
with the general culture around them. Stop me if
Which
any of this seems like
happens.
something you've seen on
I was going to say,
Instagram.
Yeah, and it is happening. I mean, deconstruction is common. So these deconstructors in the historical context, it's people who deconstruct back into Judaism, but you would think this is fair for today. So these people, they have what they have to expect is a fearful expectation of judgment and a fiery indignation that will devour the adversaries. Tim, that's strong language. And I may
Yes.
not be scared because I'm gonna apostatize, but that's still really scary.
Yes, it should be. It's meant to be. I'm pretty sure the author didn't write that and look at the rest of the committee and be like, guys, is that too strong? Like,
Right.
we're gonna scare somebody. You do understand that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that is the point.
Mm-hmm.
That you do not want to be an adversary of Jesus.
Right. No, I would think of not of all the
Don't
people
do that.
to be on his hit list. Jesus is not the one.
Well, and again, remember our context here. We've had a lot of, a good stiff dose of Psalm 110.
Mm-hmm.
The person you are becoming an adversary of is presently sitting at God's right hand, waiting until his enemies are made his footstool.
Mm-hmm.
This is, joining Future Footstools Club. This is maybe not the best idea.
Right. So again, I imagine people are nice and uncomfortable. Do you want to release any tension, or what do you want to keep going?
What,
Because it
what would I do that for?
absolutely. Because people are going, man, I don't like this. You got some people going, that's right. If they're all going to burn in hell. Some people are going, yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of scaring me. But well, they were never true Christians to begin with. Everybody's all they got their
But
apologetics and
wouldn't that
systematic.
be,
They're running.
yeah, wouldn't it be so comforting to be able to say, the people he's warning, they were never really like, they weren't like me. They were never
Yeah.
really Christians. Um, we talked about this. If you're on the live stream here and you haven't seen the Hebrews 6 episode, hop back there. We talk about that some there.
Yep.
It would be nice to believe that the people he's warning just, aren't like us, but it just
Mhm.
ain't so.
Right. So to put this as bluntly as you can, Tim, verse 27 can apply to you, Tim Nichols.
Yes, I'm not the primary audience. The primary audience is dead.
I said
Um,
apply.
but apply, yeah.
And it could apply to me, Chris Morrison, and it could apply to anyone who's believed in Jesus Christ truly, whatever truly means. That's the thing. But they believed and they're watching verse 27 can apply to them.
Absolutely.
Right.
Um, that is who the warnings are addressed to here. Is people who believe, people who have tasted the good word of God and the powers of the age to come.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, notice we see fire and we automatically free associate hell, but notice he's not like, if you're following along here, grab your Bible, keep an eye on the text on the screen. I want you to look hard for when hell comes up in this passage.
Right. Because this is the obvious question. Doesn't then verse 27 mean that, well, if I've rejected Jesus, fiery indignation, I'm going to be devoured? That's clearly a reference to hell, right? You're saying a believer can lose their salvation.
I'm saying a believer can expect judgment and fiery indignation, pardon me, which will devour the adversaries. The author has not said hell yet.
Yeah.
Um, and he's not, and this is true throughout. Biblical warnings are often somewhat vague.
Yeah.
Right. You get, now sometimes they're not. You read your read your minor prophets, and like the Assyrians are going to come and put hooks in your noses and lead you off into
Right.
slavery. Like you get some very specific things. But also, I mean, the point of a warning is not to find out, right?
Right. Anybody who has kids understands this. And I have used that line on my kids. Do you want to find out? No.
Yeah. So the point of the warning, he's not specified
Right.
exactly what form this takes. We we like to resolve that tension prematurely by reading in something that
Right.
we're afraid of, or something that our
Right.
theology suggests to us, or something that we're less afraid of than something somebody else's theology is pushing. Um, but my encouragement would be stick with the tension, stick with the text. What he has said is there's going to be judgment,
Right.
there's going to be fiery indignation, and you're going to get eaten.
So let's just keep that again a little more explicit. What you're saying is we could run off into a conversation in systematic theology about whether you can lose your salvation and get ahead, but you are saying
I'm saying,
hold fast,
he hasn't
stick
said
to the
that.
text. Hold, yeah, he hasn't said that yet. He hasn't said it. So just let the tension hold. This is a good movie. Good movies hold the tension. Hold the tension is what you're saying. Don't get ahead of the author. God inspired this at a certain pace for a reason. Let's just stay with the tension as it is, right?
Yep.
All right. So sticking with the tension, uh continue. How does verse 28? What's it going to tell us?
Well, we're going to start to specify as it happens. Like, we have this question, what's that mean? And
Mhm.
the first answer always is don't find out.
Yeah. Right.
Do the thing you're supposed to do and just never know
Hmm.
what would have happened if you'd done the bad thing. But okay, let's talk about it. He's going to specify a little more. Anyone who rejected Moses' law dies without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses.
Right.
What's that? That takes us, I mean, you can look back to like Deuteronomy 17 talks about this. There are some other passages. The contemplated death here is by stoning. That's how this works under Moses' law. If someone has committed a crime which is worthy of death, then you take them outside the village and you throw rocks at them until they die.
Right.
And then when you walk by the rock pile later, like that's the place where, yeah, you have that
Right.
conversation with your kids.
Right.
um,
And this is the law they were planning on going back to, by the way.
yes, yeah, the law you're planning on going back to, if you would have rejected that back in the day when it was applicable, here's what happens. And this could still, like, they tried to do this to Jesus, they did do this to Stephen.
Hmm.
Like the people he's writing to are persecuted and in the Jerusalem church. They know what this looks like.
Right.
They did do it to Paul too. He just lived. Um,
Right.
you know?
Right. Yeah, some of them
Okay.
might have participated in some of this in a earlier in their life.
Yeah, exactly. And this doesn't seem to have been I mean, surely they weren't stoning people, every day at noon and 3 and 3 times on Saturday, but it doesn't seem to have been overly uncommon.
Right.
Like, the John 8, the adulteress, the woman taken in adultery, who's dragged into, like, there's a whole crowd ready to stone her for committing adultery. Like, this is a thing that
Right.
happens.
Right.
Um, it may not be particularly common, but it's certainly a thing that happens. So everybody gets it. They've seen one. They've maybe participated in a few.
Hmm.
Um, and so now that's the comparison. If you'd rejected Moses' law on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, you die without mercy. The Torah is repeatedly explicit about this. Your eye shall not pity him. Take him out, stone him, thus you shall put away the evil from among you. Those phrases show up over and over and over.
Right.
Um, so now here's the comparison of how much worse punishment. If you just rejected Moses' law in some terminal way, this is what would happen to you. Now,
Hmm.
of how much worse punishment do you suppose will he be thought worthy who has trampled the Son of God underfoot, counted the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified a common thing, and insulted the Spirit of grace? If what you have, and we've spent 10 chapters building up, what you have is better than what you had under Moses' law, for all of the reasons we've gone through: better covenant, better sacrifices, better priest, like all of it,
Hmm.
more permanent deliverance, like permanently made holy. when you trample that underfoot instead of Moses' law, instead of the lesser thing, you trample the greater thing underfoot.
Right.
You insult that. What do you think is going to happen?
Right. And so again, this is what there's an argument. Well, there's an argument. Well, what the only thing it could be is hell, because I mean, what's the argument is what's worse than death? Hell, right?
Well, hell is worse than death, yes.
So just
Um,
because you can think of the hell is worse than, therefore that must be the reference, right?
well, yeah, I would encourage people that free association and exegesis are two different processes. Um, we maybe want to stick with exegesis. He says worse punishment.
Right.
Now we have an advantage of the people who are hearing this
Right. We're on the other side of history.
because
We're on the
they
outside of their
know,
frustration of their historical experience.
yes, they're being reminded throughout this book. Jesus made these promises back in Matthew, shortly
Mhm.
before he goes to the cross. They're coming in, the disciples are like marveling at, like, look at all the and he says, not one stone will be left on another. Well, that hasn't happened yet. And he says, this generation won't pass away until these things have taken place. The clock is ticking down. Barnabas, sold his land around Jerusalem because he happens to know, he's got a little inside information. He happens to know the
Right.
real estate market is going to go to crap. Um, whatever it is that's going to happen in Jerusalem, it is not going to make property values go up.
Right.
Like, he knows that. Um, right. So he sells his land, gives the money to the church, plows it into a growth industry, the kingdom of God.
Nice.
There's they know, and we are much later in the game than Barnabas.
Right.
The clock is ticking down. There's not a lot of time left for God to make good on this. This is coming. We don't know what it's going to look like, but it's coming. And everything looks
Mhm.
fine. Blue skies, like, life is good. The Christians are a persecuted minority. It looks good right now to cross that line and go back. Like,
Mhm.
what would go wrong? Like, my mother-in-law will invite me to Passover again, and everything will be fine.
Right.
But we know looking back historically what's coming,
Right.
and of course they don't. Um, and let's just finish out the warning here before we talk about that further. So we know him who said, "Vengeance is mine; I will repay," says the Lord. And again, the Lord will judge his people. Now, both of these are coming from Deuteronomy 32. It's 35 and 36. This is in the Song of Moses. It's part of the Moses concentrated one chapter long meditation on the law, which he delivers to the children of the Exodus generation under Joshua right before they go into the land.
Yeah.
And so we're contemplating the law of Moses. We know God said, the Lord will judge his people. Vengeance is mine. We know him. That song is what you look back at all the way through Chronicles, all the way through the prophets. Like, this is God making good on those promises. If you do what I teach you to do, you keep my covenant, I'll bless you, I'll reward you. Your enemies will flee before you. If you don't, you will flee before your enemies. Like, all of those promises are there. And
Mhm.
our authors are tagging that and saying, again, that's just Moses' law.
Right.
Do you think God's character has changed? And you're doing the thing you're thinking about doing is actually worse, much worse.
For all the reasons we've
Anything.
seen in the 10 chapters building up to this. He's greater, he's the high priest, he's according to Melchizedek, he all those things.
Yes, you couldn't possibly have offended God. There's no part of the law of Moses you could break that would offend God the way this is going to offend God.
Right.
What do you think is going to happen? We know what God is like. The Lord will judge his people. And again, don't miss this, his people.
Yeah. And this is what's like buzzing in my ears right now. One of the things that converted me out of the final perseverance of the saints theology, and which is kind of like one of the straws that broke the camel's back for getting me out of that, was this passage, because 29 and 30 to me are so incredibly clear. It says this 30 is clear, but going back to 29, if you've trampled the Son of God underfoot, counted the blood by which he was sanctified. Now, Tim, what's wrong with this argument, Tim? But if you've been sanctified by the blood of Christ, there's no way you're not a believer. And
Yep.
then vengeance is mine, I will repay. The Lord will judge his people. So his people are in Deuteronomy, it's his own. And by extension, we're using it here to discuss. This isn't people who are like associated with the church who have never come to know Christ. The most natural reading of this is believers. They know who Jesus is. They have trusted him, all that language in Hebrews 6. And it's these people who have trampled the Son of God underfoot. They've called his blood common. Oh, man.
Yes. Yeah, the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified. And like, don't forget, for by one offering he has forever perfected those who are sanctified. Like the way Hebrews uses the word sanctified is a point in time made holy. Christ by one offering has made you holy. If you're his, you are made holy by that offering. That's it. That's all there is.
Yeah.
We're talking about God's people bailing on what they know.
Right.
And and again, we have the advantage. We can look back, we can read Josephus and find out what happened.
Mhm.
Right. So they quit paying taxes to Caesar. They revolted. Titus, the Caesar at the time, was busy fighting another war. So Titus comes, brings an army, lays siege to Jerusalem. All the bad things that happen in sieges happen, the famines, the diseases, the infighting in Jerusalem. Lots of people die in the siege, never make it to the end of the siege, are killed by their own countrymen, starve to death, are eaten by their own countrymen, like all of that. And then if you survive long enough to get to the end of the siege, when Titus finally breaches the city, you get crucified. He lined the roads with crosses, and ain't no
Yeah.
breaking legs to make it shorter going on at this point. Now, is that, or is it not, worse than being stoned?
And let's clarify again the point that you're making. So I asked earlier in verse 28, what's worse than death? Isn't it hell? Well, it's worse than death, but you're talking about, to hear you say, the method of death in verse 28. What's the prescription is stoning. And you're saying there is something worse than being stoned to death.
Sure.
And it's not necessarily hell. I mean, hell is worth being stoned to death, but there are things in this world that are worse than being stoned to death. And these people suffered a death far worse than stoning.
Yeah, and I mean, our hope is that this warning was effective, and the people who Titus crucified were not the recipients of this letter. But, we don't know. But imagine someone hears this letter, is on the receiving end of this, and then they fail to heed the warning. They abandon the faith anyway. They go back to the Levitical system. This is what would have what happened to them. Like,
Right.
they did not get a quick death by stoning outside the village. They got an agonizingly slow death by Roman crucifixion.
That just has to sit a minute. That's what happened. So let me ask you a pastoral question. So you're saying God would let his own children, if they lose their faith in him, suffer a torturous death, that he would let that happen to them?
He let that happen to Peter.
Yeah.
The Apostle John got French fried and he lived. Like, guys, like, God plays rough.
Yeah.
There, the difference between this guy and Peter is Peter is crucified for his faith, enters
Mhm.
heaven to shouts of well done, good and faithful servant. This guy enters heaven to, well, you're here.
Yeah. And I think it's in
That's
Second Peter
interesting.
that Peter talks about securing an abundant entrance into the kingdom.
Yeah. This, this, yes, God look, prosperity gospel is a lie, right?
Mhm.
Um, the notion that you can somehow control the outcomes in such a way, if I do everything right, then God will owe me a nice smooth life or whatever. Like God looked over a cloud one day and saw a man who was so righteous. There was nobody like him in the whole world.
Yeah.
Nobody. Now I like be cool to be that guy one day, but I honestly have zero hope that I'm ever going to be that person.
Right.
I I know me a little too well. I just don't think it's likely. Like that's not a race I'm likely to win. Okay?
Hmm.
Um God sees that guy. Do you know what his life is like? The book of Job describes it.
Yeah.
There's would God would God allow Titus the Roman to happen to an apostate? Sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No,
Yeah,
and
but
I
like
just,
at least you can say, well, you know, when this guy rolls into heaven reeking of the smoke of burning wood, hay, and stubble, um, there's going to be a welcoming committee who wrote this book and be like, I told you, man.
yeah,
I
warned you.
tried to warn you.
Right. No, I love that line. God plays rough. That's just so at odds with American sensibilities and American Christianity. And again, I don't want to pick. I don't want to fuss, Tim, but if I can just, this is where my mind is. You know, I was in church this morning with our nice, comfy, padded seats, and the music was amazing. And I love good music, and it was comfortable, and the sermon was uplifting, and it was very pleasant. I had coffee during the service, and I had a donut, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that's rather far removed from the picture you're painting.
Well, those are God's good gifts.
Mhm.
Like we should love and be grateful for those things. Um, but in the Ecclesiastes way, where you know enjoy all the days of your vaporous life,
Right.
um, but I didn't know that it is vaporous. Don't turn it into an idol. God,
Mhm.
it is our privilege. Look, no one wants to watch a movie about somebody's easy life,
Right.
right? Those are boring stories. Like if we do a like imagine doing a university short film about your like your experience of church this morning.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah,
jeepers.
exactly.
I mean, I
Right.
maybe I wish I could taste the coffee, but
Right.
there's nothing there. Like it is our privilege to play, to get out on the field and play as hard as we can play in the best story that anybody has ever thought of, ever.
Right.
And it's our job as characters to be like to be good characters in that story, to be strong, a strong flavor. Like don't be a wuss. Don't just be background scenery. Um, and to know that the story's not really about us. We are in an important way all background. It's about Jesus and what he did for us.
But
And
isn't that the flip side of this coin? You just said don't be a wuss. If I take the two statements, God doesn't play rough and don't be a wuss, isn't the flip side of that? I think I commented this weeks ago. Hebrews is calling us to a type of muscular Christianity, or maybe a virtuous Christianity, an exciting Christianity, where we get to actually get in the game, to use that analogy. And not only we have the privilege to that, we're called to that. And that's something that God expects of us. That's exciting, or it
Yes.
can be.
Well, it should be. There's the same, like think about how James ends.
Mhm.
He who turns a sinner from the error of his ways saves a soul from death and covers a multitude of sins. Like we're playing for real marbles here. The people who are writing this book
Mhm.
are deeply aware that the possibility they're warning people against is terrifyingly real,
Yeah.
right? When we seek to turn someone away from the sin that is going to destroy them, whether it's deconstructing, abandoning the faith, or abandoning the faith in some other way through a moral failure, through embezzling a bunch of money, through, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, the consequences of those actions are real and devastating and genuinely destroy lives. And the more, mm, okay, I'm going to sound a little judgy and I don't quite mean it the way it's probably going to come off, but I'm going to say it anyway. Um,
Yeah.
if you're in a, comfortable mid-sized suburban church,
Mhm.
it can get a little hard to remember sometimes
Yeah.
that this stuff kills people
Yeah.
because it all kind of happens in slow motion. And you can live a, decent, respectable, non-scandalous red state life in a church like that. And if it's big enough that you can sort of be comfortably anonymous, um, you can cultivate quite a repertoire of sins that don't ever quite like put you on Skid Row or anything, but you fetch up at 70 years old with a very empty life and no real fruit and a heart that was a ragbag of lusts and fears to start with and has only gotten worse over decades. Um, and that's a terrible thing. And if you sit at the bedside of someone like that, as the cancer is closing in on them and there's nothing left but morphine,
Yeah.
that's a terrible thing. Um, but it
Mhm.
happens so slowly that it can be hard. Like there's an eyes to see thing, but it
Mhm.
can be hard to see.
Well,
Um,
and there may be a truth here, totally different context, but about it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, because there is a sense in which creature comforts can make it more difficult to see what your failure to live out faith is doing to you spiritually.
yes. And I would just encourage people, it's worth your time to get involved, like put yourself on the sharp end of ministry.
Yeah.
Get involved in a group for, men whose wives have divorced them, women whose husbands have abandoned them. Go, work with, sling hash in a soup kitchen for a while. Get to know, like ask people's names, get to know them over months and years. Put yourself in the way of places where you can see this play out. Because like I read stuff like this and I have names and faces
Yeah.
in my
Me
head.
too. Me too.
Um, people who um one young man in particular who overdosed on heroin in a Burger King bathroom up in Denver, and he's no longer with us. A young lady who was grievously sinned against, but never like could not bring herself to rely on the Lord in a way that brought her out of it, and ultimately drank herself to death.
Mhm.
Um, and she would like these were my people. It was my job to like, yeah, they made their own choices, but I'm the shepherd here. It is my job to move them to make better choices. And whether there was like, Jesus can tell me whether I biffed it or whether I did the best anybody could do when, when the time comes. But the wolves got away with the sheep. We are playing for very real stakes here. Sin kills.
And I guess that's to kind of circle back around to the question in the thumbnail title, can you lose your salvation? I guess pastorally, that's what bothers me so bad about the free association of this with hell. Or worse, maybe the saying, well, this is about hell and true believers can never suffer this. I feel like that what that does is that takes the real consequences. And I'm sorry, I don't want to make it sound like hell's not a real consequence, but I'm going to say that anyway. I feel like, Tim, that interpretation minimizes the text because it takes the real consequences of apostasy, of losing the central importance of your faith. It just takes it and moves it into the next life and ignores the fact that it's devastating to what God's called you to.
Right now, yeah, think of it like if you're familiar with the economic term opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which is the idea that if you spend, if I take my $10 and I go spend it at McDonald's, the cost of the McDonald's meal is the $10. The opportunity cost of the McDonald's meal is what else I could have bought with that $10.
Right.
The opportunity cost of free associating your way to a bad interpretation of this passage is you miss what this is actually talking about. And there's a thing that God is trying to tell you here, and you're missing it. You're not hearing what's actually here. What's actually here is that God judges his people. And the particular sin in view in this warning letter is deconstructing, is walking away from the faith, falling back into the pool of the prevailing culture and sort of becoming invisible, floating downstream instead of swimming upstream. That's the sin that's in the crosshairs here. But ask yourself the question, if God moved somebody to write a warning letter to you today, what would the sin be?
Mm-hmm.
Because whatever it is, whatever the answer to that is, I don't know. But whatever the answer to that is for you, do you think it's any less deadly?
Right. It's a good question. Yeah, the privileging of one particular sin over another.
And there are like being addicted to fentanyl and being addicted to cookies and cream ice cream have, differential consequences. Yeah, but do you think the second one can't kill you?
Come with me to the ICU and let's talk to some patients. I had a patient who young girl in her 20s now. She had a particular kind of diabetes, but she was the kind that was, I won't go into medical terminology. She was not overweight. She was in the hospital so often because she was always sick and couldn't control it. She finally ended her own life by drinking a 2-liter bottle of grape soda. And it wasn't a sin, and it wasn't a sin. Suicide is a sin, but in my view. But what I mean was the consequences of destroying your body can be truly devastating. It really genuinely can. And again, I think this goes back to my creature comforts concern. In American culture, we're so worried. In the Baptist culture I grew up in, Tim, it was drinking, smoking, cussing, sleeping around. Those are the ones you avoided, right? You don't do those things, you're okay, you get to go to heaven. But outside of that, you've got there's this sense that, well, those are the big sins, but it's kind of like all those are a problem.
Yeah, we should be so lucky. I mean, context dependent, but 3 of the 4 of those aren't even sins. But, 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 you know, we should be so lucky as to just have 4 sins to avoid. You know?
Right. No, I
Wouldn't that be,
wish, right? That's just the
wouldn't that
country I
be
grew up
nice?
in.
Life should be so simple. And that, like, that's exactly the point, right? You can live a non-scandalous existence. You avoid those 4 things that someone could take a picture of you doing. You know,
Right.
never let that picture happen, and you're good, right?
No.
Like, you can be self-obsessed and envious and proud and lustful, just not actually sleeping with anybody. But Jesus covered that one.
Uh-huh. Sure. And again, and I know people who didn't do those 4 particular sins, and yet their lives were destroyed
yes,
for, I think, the point that you're getting at here. And you haven't read verse 31, but I would suggest they fell into the hands of a living God.
yes. Well, we all will. We all, like, do you think you live somewhere else?
Right.
He upholds all things by the word of his power. We've been over this. Like, if you're wondering what you're standing on, the answer is the word of his power is holding you up.
Yeah.
And it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And this, like, this is a crescendo. This is a, like, if you're not wetting your pants here, you're not you're not paying attention. This
Well, and
is
again, this
supposed
isn't
to
the verse
be.
quoted, but it brings to me mind the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And again, it's a verse that we mentioned, but I don't know. At least I will confess, Tim, I struggle sometimes to make that the let's use the biblical language. I struggle at times to make the fear of the Lord the beginning of my wisdom. And sometimes I try to explain it away. Well, it means reverence.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
does.
sure. But
Yes.
it also means fear, doesn't it?
Well, okay, so useful analogy. Um, I I'm coming up on 49. I've been doing, you know, martial arts and self-defense since I was 17. Um, I have trained with some extremely dangerous people, and not of all of them were good men.
Mhm.
Because getting expert at injuring people, the path to that generally does not, like, just lead to Sunday school classes. Um, and some of the people I've trained with, like, would do you if you offended them, and no particular reservations about doing it in front of the police station.
Mhm.
Um, you treat, you know, fighting men treat fighting men reverently.
Yeah.
Like, you are in the company of a dangerous man who, in the one case I can think of in particular, not even someone I was really training with, just someone I happened to be around, um, was in a use of force profession at the time of the incident I'm thinking about, was a common, you know, had mustered into that profession out of the Marines, had done a couple tours overseas, combat Marine, um, and took offense at something I had said. And it happened that the thing that I had said was true, and I
Mhm.
wasn't going to just, oh, never mind, I'm wrong. But you proceed carefully at that point.
Yeah.
Particularly, this particular guy had a bad case of survivor guilt because of something that had happened to him overseas, and was kind of looking for a lethal confrontation that he wouldn't survive,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
had no particular reservations about kicking it off with me. Um, he sort of didn't want to make it anyway. Um, you treat that guy very carefully.
Yep.
Now, am I afraid of him? Yes. Um, I could have died that night. If I'd given him sufficient cause, he would have done me. Um, I could have killed him that night. we both could have died that night. Like all of those things are very real. And I chose my words very carefully, and we were able to de-escalate out of it. And we both lived. And, may God bless him. I hope he's still kicking around and in a better place than he was that night. Um, but
But that's kind of the beginning of wisdom. It's recognizing who it is you're talking to.
yeah, who is it that you're dealing with? Well, who you're dealing with here is the one who upholds all things by the word of his power, is the living God. He made heaven and earth.
Yeah.
Don't cross him. And yeah, he also loves you.
But don't cross him.
But like I've trained with these kind of guys that really liked me.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't make me feel comfortable crossing them.
I'll name drop. Listen, I'll name drop one guy. The Bible study that I've been teaching here for 2 years, not here online, but just here where I live. And I'll give his actual name. There's a fighter who attends. In fact, he's the technical leader insofar as he organized it. His name is Cosmo Alexander. Cosmo Alexander is a 7-time world Muay Thai champion. There's videos of him ending the career of a young up and coming MMA fighter. He punched the guy in the face and broke like 20 something bones in his face. Cosmo is an extremely dangerous man. He recently retired from professional fighting. That's his full time. What he does is he trains fighters.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that man. He's a great friend. And if I need something, I can call him and he'd be there. Yo, Chris, my brother, what's going on? I mean, he's a great guy. I promise you, Tim, I would not cross Cosmo. I'm not going to do it.
Right. And how much greater, like we get this.
Yeah.
If again, this is one of those places where like street ministry helps a little. In a suburban context where it's a little hard to believe that things would go beyond somebody punching somebody. Sometimes it's a little hard to grasp gravity of consequence. But you get outside of that very cushy suburban context into the sort of place where the grizzled old guys will talk about throwing a young buck up against the wall and stabbing him a little just to get his attention. And like, oh yeah, you treat these guys with respect. How much, and we're going to take God casually?
Yeah. I guess that's kind of we gave a few more verses, I think, but that's kind of the takeaway that I really want people to hear out of this passage for me, Tim. And then for the book as a whole, is I like the way you put that, is getting out of the suburban notion of Christianity, that Christianity is something I do on Sunday mornings and I put some CCM on the car, and the whole idea of Christianity is be nice to each other at work. And those are all good things. And I don't at all want to take away from that, but I want to figure out how to go far beyond that, because I think the author of Hebrews wants us to go far beyond that.
Yeah, and if in God's good providence he put you in the burbs, I'm not saying you have to move in order to be a Christian.
No, of course not.
But you do need to look at the world that you're in and understand this through the lens of Scripture, and understand the seriousness of these, like the sins that look so inconsequential are somehow, I promise, going to kill you if you let them run. And now, okay, so we hit that crescendo.
Yeah.
It's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And this is the moment where you would expect an author to, and you, can you not feel the flames licking under your feet? Like that whole thing, right?
Right.
But what do we get? But recall the former days in which, after you were illuminated, you endured a great struggle with sufferings, partly while you were made a spectacle by both reproaches and tribulations, and partly while you became companions of those who were so treated. Guys, like, this is terrifying. But remember what you were like back at the beginning? You didn't care about what anybody thought about you. You and whatever the persecution was that was coming, yeah, let it come. You endured all of it. And like you, if they made a public example of you, made a spectacle of you, looted your house, whatever, you were not only did you accept that, you let it be known that you were friends with the people who were getting the treatment.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
and
you've
even,
been in the trenches. You've been there. You've done
yeah,
this.
you've been there, you've done this. You weren't even afraid to be like, if you were somehow evading the treatment yourself, you weren't afraid to be seen with the people who were getting it.
Mhm.
And he continues, for you had compassion on me and my chains and joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods. They took your stuff. They fined you, they looted you, and the cops looked the other way, whatever that looked like. Like, you have suffered for your faith.
Mhm.
The people he's writing this to are spiritual heroes.
Yeah.
They have, most of them, read these, like, look at these verses. Most of them have been through stuff most of the Americans who are going to watch this video have never been through.
Right.
Like, they are the kind of people we would look up to and be like, wow, he's done
Right.
all of that. And
Yeah.
he's
The
still calling himself
recipients
a Christian.
the recipients of this letter are the ones that we want on a stage on Sunday morning telling us about all the stuff that they have gone through for the faith.
Right, exactly. And they're the ones who are being warned not to give up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, dear viewer, how much more does this not apply to me and you?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm gonna fold because somebody might say something mean about me on Twitter. I'm gonna fold because HR like has called me into a meeting and we're like, I'm looking down the barrel of a cardboard box in a taxi kind of firing.
Right.
Um, I mean, look at these guys. And
Right.
and what got them through it? Last part of verse 34, knowing that you have a better and an enduring possession for yourselves in heaven. They had their eyes on something else.
Yeah.
Like, they're going to take my stuff. I'm going to go over and minister to this brother who's just been horribly mistreated this way for no better reason than that he's following Jesus. You know what? He's crashing on my couch tonight. No, you know what? Forget that. He's taking the master suite tonight. I'm crashing on my couch tonight.
Right.
He's had a rough day. And I'm going to make sure, I'm going to let it's fine. Everybody can know that he's on my couch. That's fine. I don't care. That might mean they're coming for me tomorrow. Okay, fine. Accept it. Just accepted it.
Yeah.
Why? Because because they have eyes that can see into heaven. And they can see the heavenly reward in front of them. And that's enough. And they're confident. Like, the challenge in verse 35, do not cast away your confidence, implies that they have some. Like, they've been through
Yeah.
all of this confidently. Again, like you said, these are the ones we want on stage behind the microphone telling us about all the things that they've been through, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't get like just he's not asking them for anything they haven't already done. Just don't quit.
Yeah. Just keep doing it. You know you can. Like,
You
I
know
know
you
you're
can
tired, dude, but it's okay. You've done this before. What? Keep going, man.
you're doing it already. Just don't stop.
Yeah.
For you have
Again,
need.
the
Go ahead.
just I just want to say the absurdity of suggesting that we might be talking about people who are not true believers
Oh my
makes
goodness.
this passage absurd, because if they're not true believers, the call would not be keep doing what you're doing. The call would be all that stuff you did before was fake.
Yeah, it doesn't even matter. Filthy rags. You need to believe in Jesus.
Right.
Right?
Or
That's
the
like,
argument would be, and of those of you who do fall away, well, they weren't really believers. It was all a waste of their time. But you guys, I know you're going to keep going. It just, the logic just falls apart to me with a, I don't think it takes the text seriously.
no, it doesn't. So do not cast away your confidence, which has great reward, for you have need of endurance, so
Mm.
that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. And now he's going to Habakkuk.
Mm-hmm.
And hear this with the ears that they had. This Habakkuk promise, it's made before the Babylonian captivity. Yet a little while, and he who is coming will come and will not tarry. Now the just will live by faith, but if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. That promise is not some theological statement of soteriology. The
Right.
just man will live as opposed to dying by
Right.
his faith. Go back to Habakkuk 2. It's all right there. Knock yourself out reading it. The people who cashed in that promise, think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Right.
Think Daniel. Think Esther. Mordecai. These are the just who lived by faith. And God made this promise on the front end of that invasion that he would preserve alive
Right.
those who exercised faith.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have some of those stories of people who did exercise faith and God made good, despite the fact that the physics were not on their side.
Right.
But if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. God does not, God don't dig that. But we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe to the saving of the soul. Saving of the soul, psuche, life. We're talking all the way through here about if you bail on this, judgment is coming and God's going to kill you, and he's going to kill you in particularly gruesome fashion.
Right. But and
And
again, and I people need to accept that's I was on Facebook. I think you saw, I'm not going to say the name. There was a conversation on Facebook just the other day when you and I were recording this. Does God still do this? And I know there are people within our own discussion groups like, oh no, God doesn't do that anymore. That's Old Testament stuff.
oh yeah.
Have they not read Hebrews?
Or First Corinthians 10 and 10 and
or,
11,
or Acts
or right,
or
Revelation, or like, come on. Um, yeah, this is all very real. There's no reason to think that it isn't. Um, and the people like man, my the woman I mentioned earlier, young woman I mentioned earlier, who drank herself to death. I know where she is right now. I look forward to seeing her again. But sin kills.
it does.
Um, and what the author says to the people he's writing to warn them is, but that's not you guys. Not in a you couldn't way, but like, this is not who we are. We trust God. We believe.
I can almost hear the tone of like a football coach in a locker room. We're
Yes.
not gonna we're gonna. It's almost this like this pep rally kind of language.
Yes, we are winners.
Yeah.
Guys, that was a and it's not even like we think in warning passages. We have this idea of like it's the halftime speech from the football coach where
Mm-hmm.
they're down 14-0, and like, guys, that was rough, but we are winners. We're gonna do it. No,
Right.
no, read this paragraph. They're up 14-0, but they're
Right.
tired.
Right. Yeah, this is the 2 minute warning at the end of the game. They're up by a couple of touchdowns. They just need to finish out the game
Just
so they can
finish the
get the
game.
trophy.
Exactly. Exactly. You're winners. You're already winners. We are not those people. Just keep going.
Right. Now, I hear the tonally, that's easy. I would like you to address you touched on it and I heard it, but just for the sake of anybody who's not clear, touch on the word perdition because perdition immediately gets associated again, free associated with hell. And again, the saving of the saving of the soul gets free associated with heaven. So if you would just touch on what does perdition mean and what does saving of the soul mean?
Sure. That is, let's see, 39. I'm just going to grab Greek text in front of me here to make my life easier.
Sure. You don't have the Greek text memorized.
You
How dare
know,
you?
I'd make a terrible Pharisee, I guess. Um, so the soul,
I
I
hope
mentioned
so.
it, suke
Mm-hmm.
means soul, means life. Um, there's a great word study to do on this if you want to do it and just see all the places where it's talking about physical life. That's what it means. Um,
Yeah. In fact, I might suggest the word soul. The word life probably is a better base meaning than the ghosty substance that lives inside of you that goes to heaven when you die.
yeah,
I'm not saying it can never mean that, but it refers to your life. That's what the word suke means.
yes.
So saving of your life, the saving of the life would be a perfectly legitimate translation.
And perdition, it's apoleia. Um, it just means destruction, ruin, annihilation. We are not of those who draw back to destruction, but of
Mm-hmm.
those who believe to the saving of our lives,
Mm-hmm.
which tracks perfectly with the Habakkuk quote
Right. So I was going to ask you,
read
just
in its
make
original
that
context.
connection a little clear, because again, the free association, I'm going to steal that language from you from now on. Well, perdition is hell, and saving the soul is heaven, and the just live by faith. Paul uses that for going to heaven. So I can see the argument somebody would make there, very surface level associations. But if you would just real quick touch on the Habakkuk and then how he's using that and how the other reading is preferable in your.
Well, I would, I'm not sure it's quite as simple as Paul uses that to talk about going to heaven. But we're not quoting Romans 4 here, we're quoting Habakkuk 2.
Right.
Um, and what Habakkuk is rather plainly talking about is the physical destruction of people in the coming judgment and the physical deliverance of people through the coming judgment. Like, Daniel doesn't get to skip the judgment.
Right.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't get to skip the judgment. And I don't know that we even know. This is a fun thing to think about. I'm not sure that we know that they were like the Joshua and Caleb of their generation, completely undeserving of the judgment.
Mm-hmm.
We sort of tell ourselves this story. Daniel's this like bright, young, devout Jewish boy. He's sort of Joshua and Caleb in his
Right.
generation, but he doesn't get to dodge it. He gets hauled up. For all we know, I think he could have been a drunken frat boy.
Sure.
On the kind of guy the minor prophets are describing, and he has his, this is anachronistic, but come to Jesus moment, um, on the road to Babylon in a slave train,
Mm-hmm.
and becomes the man that we meet in the book of Daniel. I don't know that we
Right.
know one way or the
Right.
other. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter,
Right.
because if by living out his faith, God has promised to save his life, and God does. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as far as I can tell, are not even sure that maybe they never heard Habakkuk. They don't remember. They're not thinking about it at the time. They're like, here's the deal, O king, we're not bowing down to the image. Now we know you have this furnace warmed up over here, and our
Right.
God is able to deliver us from that. And also, if he doesn't, we're just not bowing down to your image. So what about that? You
Right.
know, they don't care.
Right.
They are going to live out their faith, and it turns out God has
That they
committed
live.
himself in advance that those people are going to live through this one.
Yeah.
That's not always something that God commits to.
Right. But it did in those cases, and in the particular historical context of the upcoming AD 70, it's going to be the case with these people. And then the argument by broader application would be, I can think, as we've been really drilling this for the past hour and a half now, is your life, both literally and metaphorically, is at stake when you when the deconstruction can lead to the end of your life, metaphorically, literally, or you can actually take seriously your Christian faith and watch how God delivers you from all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. And again, the like on the application side, the thing to think about here is, I mean, first of all, just fairly straightforward application. We do live in a time when the temptation to fall back into the prevailing culture and deconstruct your faith is very much a temptation. There's a little cottage industry there.
Yeah.
You can break up with Jesus on Instagram, and a bunch of people will tell you how courageous you are.
Right.
That's so like those applications are all there. But then the other thing to think about is, if God moved a prophet to send you such a letter, maybe that wouldn't be the sin that is the most dangerous thing to you right now, is the temptation to break up with Jesus on Instagram. Most of us are probably not there. Um,
Right.
but what would it be? Well, let's handle that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe be very intentional and serious about handling it.
Yes.
I have often said, and again, tell me if you think this is an unfair application. I primarily pulled this from Galatians, but I think it's applicable here, and I think we'll see it especially next time we do Romans 11. I mean Hebrews 11. I'm thinking about um, anytime I sin, and I'm seriously thinking about individual sins. I went off the line there. Every time I sin, it's always in that moment. It's in that specific moment. I wasn't trusting Jesus for the thing in that moment,
Mhm.
without fail. And would seem to me that when you're trusting Jesus, the Spirit's just not going to lead you astray. So my point is that the Spirit will not lead me into sin. By faith, I might mishear the Spirit and do something stupid because I'm a guy, but the Spirit's not going to lead me into sin. And when I sin, it's because I lost track of faith. And so I'm hearing the just shall live by faith. Then if I really could figure out how to perfect my faith, which won't happen in this life, but if I could perfect my faith, Tim, all that stuff would just take care of itself.
Yes. Yeah, and that won't the God has budgeted for our failure, for which all thanksgiving. Um, so this is that First John discourse of,
Right.
I write these things to you so that you may not sin. If anyone sins, we have an advocate with the
Advocate
Father.
with a father. Mm-hmm.
God has budgeted for the failure, but the reason we're having this conversation is so that you won't fail.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do this well. We have, and where I am excited as we close in on the last few chapters of Hebrews here, I am particularly excited about these last few chapters, because this is where we really get down to the brass tacks. We've spent a
Yeah.
long time developing a picture, because what the authors want us to see is their audience is facing a particular situation. And what they want us to see is like, let's just take a step back and describe the situation. Let's get a little more context on this, because you've got the like,
Right.
this is what's happening this morning. Let's zoom back, which is why we start God, who at various times and in various ways
Mhm.
spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets. We're going back. The story that you're living in doesn't start with this morning, doesn't start with when you came to Jesus, doesn't start with your first memory, doesn't start with your parents or your grandparents. It starts with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it goes through Abraham and Moses and David writing Psalm 110 and Jesus beginning to fulfill Psalm 110. And through this moment that you're thinking about this morning, and on to the day when Jesus descends from heaven, all tatted up and slaying the nations with the sword of his mouth, and into the new Jerusalem coming down from heaven. That's this. So let's get some context. Here's the timeline. You are here.
Right.
And the picture that Hebrews has painted is the thing you're thinking of falling back into. That was pretty good. It was never meant to be permanent.
Right.
And, at a certain point, that was exactly what you should do. But we're over here now. And
Right.
here, there's something else to do. Jesus has ended that system and broken open. I don't know if you play spades, but if you do, like, Jesus broke spades. It's a
Oh
whole new
yeah,
game
I've
now.
it's been a while. It's been a while since I've played any spades, but
you know, you know, all the all that stuff that's been sitting in the hand that you couldn't use yet, now you can. It's a whole new game. And we have duties. They had duties then, we have duties now, and we're about to get into like, okay, so what do we do?
very
And the
good.
don't quit doing what you're doing is an important part of that, but it's actually the very least of it. And I'm so excited for where we're going.
As we start to land the plane, I know we got a few people, no, not really conversation in the chat box. That's okay. If you have anything you want to throw up for Tim, let us know as we start to wrap up. So I know that you're especially excited about chapter 12, but we do get the really popular chapter 11 on the Hall of Faith is the next study, right?
Which is also going to be an enormous amount of fun.
And I want to say that that's one of those that, to me, Hebrews, other than the 5 warning passages, and especially Hebrews 6 and Hebrews 10, I think most people go to Hebrews and they think about the Hall of Faith. So I'm looking forward to seeing the Hall of Faith in its context. Now that we've been discussing this particular warning passage and all the you've got work to do, I think that's fun. And then we'll have chapter 12, and there's one more warning passage in 12, and then final closing thoughts. Have I kind of understood the flow of the book?
Yeah, and that chunk of 12, the second half of chapter 12, is my favorite passage in the book. I'm so looking forward to it. But yeah, if you're watching this and you've been kind of following along, let me encourage you, peek ahead into chapter 11 and then go back and read those stories. So with an eye on what chapter on the distillation that you're getting in chapter 11, go back and actually read the stories, and with 11 as commentary, and see this the way because the readers of this knew all these stories by heart.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I imagine a lot of people they know some of these stories by heart, but not a ton of them. So I'm sure that we can't do all of them, but I imagine you'll give us a few of them when we do them
Yeah, as
in
we
the
go
next
through them, we're
chapter.
going to go through them at a pace where it's not going to be possible to go run down every cross reference and tell the entire story of everything. But
Right.
but do that, but do that. There's good meat to be had there.
Excellent. And if and when we get around to getting all this in the written format, we'll do some excursus articles on each one of them. How's that for some
Oh
fun?
yes, that's a great idea.
Love that.
Yeah, I did a sermon series once that was just out of Hebrews 11, where we took it a story at a time.
Oh, wow.
It just went through the whole thing.
That would be a lot of fun.
It was a lot of
All
fun.
right. Well, Tim, I think that, see, according to my timer, we're right at an hour and a half. So let me go ahead and, as Charles Jennings over at the Layman's Seminary likes to say, let me land this plane now. And you stick around a minute, Tim, if that's okay. And
Of
then,
course.
dear reader, dear viewer, I don't have my coffee cup, sadly, and I don't, because they're in a live, I don't have my little clip yet where it's gonna come around and say the whole fade out Gulf side, but I'll still say all the same. May God rich until I see you next time. May God richly